It is Diem Death Knell week, and one of the things that I think is particularly interesting about it is that David Marcus, he announced this in November. He said, "Hey, I'm leaving Meta. I've been here for a while. I was in charge of Novi, the digital wallet subsidiary of Meta, and I'm stepping down at the end of the year." So, end of the year comes, it happens. All this news comes out about Diem basically being wound down. Some of those assets sold to Silvergate Bank, and now the news that we're talking about today is a pair of tweets from David Marcus that I found really interesting. I'll read them to you just for, oh, there it is. There it is. There it is. It's become clear to me
Still read
that
them to
Bitcoin
us.
will be the one asset and L1 still around in 20 plus years. So this is interesting because now we have David Marcus, who was helming the Libra effort from launch. He became the face of the Libra hearings on Capitol Hill. He was put through the ringer. And if anyone is qualified to comment on the value of censorship-resistant money, it may indeed be him. And we see him doing that in a pair of tweets yesterday. So I'm really interested in where this guy is going to land next. David Marcus, he was formerly of PayPal. He's sort of a fintech legend. And he seems to be continuing his journey down the crypto rabbit hole. And I'm very curious to see where he's going to go now that he is out of Novi and of Facebook land. So this is about that. A lot of interesting ideas in this pair of tweets, but also just I think a lot of questions are swirling as to what's next for David Marcus. So I'm going to throw that question straight to Naomi. If you want to riff on what's next for Mr. Marcus or some of these ideas that are included here, I think they're really interesting.
Yeah, I think the most interesting part of this tweet is actually the Bitcoin comment, and you alluded to why, Zach. I mean, David has been fighting the government ever since Facebook first announced that they were going to get involved with creating a cryptocurrency, and it wasn't even them that was creating it. They were sort of leading this project, but inviting all these other companies to participate, be node validators. It was going to be this essentially decentralized system, federated system, or however you want to call it, because a lot of people would look at the centralized companies and say like, oh, they're too big, this is not decentralized. I agree with that, but I also like the idea of what they were getting at, not just Facebook being in control of something, but bringing in all of these other companies, Uber and Visa and whoever else was involved at the time. I'm still really sad that we didn't see that iteration, because the initial vision for Libra was this basket of assets. It was this very novel concept where it wasn't just going to be pegged to the US dollar like stable coins are. It was going to have all kinds of things. Maybe it'd have bonds in there. Maybe it'd have like S&P 500 shares. I mean, we don't know. They didn't actually get that far. The government kind of shut it down right at the start and said, you can't do this at all. And so it's really disappointing that we didn't get there. But David is a very interesting figure. I alluded to this on the show last week when we were talking about him. He is really early into Bitcoin, and people just think of him as this Facebook exec, and they're just like, oh, he got involved and he's just doing Facebook. Like, no, you read about him in early accounts of Bitcoin history, you'll learn about David Marcus. He was very early on this bandwagon and being into Bitcoin. And now he's kind of come full circle. I think he kind of saw that and he's like, yes, this is a great concept. Let's take this and run with it. And then we'll do even more things. And we'll have this basket of assets. And we'll have all of these different companies. And now he's kind of realizing what the ultimate promise of Bitcoin was it censorship resistance. There were no companies to pressure to stop their involvement. And so Bitcoin really keeps time and time again proving itself to be this kind of indestructible asset, this thing that's not going to go away because there's nowhere for governments to really target. I mean, David, I wish him all the best. He's really done a great job being a spokesperson for Libra when it first came out. If you go back to watch those hearings, oh my gosh, the facepalm moments. So all of the dumb questions he had to field, and he was so patient. He's really trying his best to be like, no, Libra is the asset. Calibra is our wallet. So yes, we can KYC that. This other thing, it's like this decentralized system. It's, he's trying to explain this difference. These politicians aren't getting it. They're just screaming at him about like data and privacy and all of that. But it's worth watching some of the highlights from back in 2019. But I'm going to throw this to you, Will, for your thoughts.
Yeah, I loved a lot of the points that you brought up. And I think the one that probably has the biggest implications here is the fact that Bitcoin is going to continue being what it is. And he alludes to that in the tweet, saying that in the next 20 years, he expects Bitcoin to continue to be the dominant cryptocurrency. He says Ethereum might be number 2 for now, but there's up and comers. We've talked about that a lot here on the Hash because we've seen so many different up and comers. We've seen Luna, we've seen AVAX, we've seen Solana. The list keeps going on and on. But Bitcoin continues to be the number 1. And I think to Marcus's points here, it's like, why would Bitcoin be the number 1? And what implications does that have for the cryptocurrency industry if Bitcoin is going to continue to be the number 1? And I think lastly, will Bitcoin change? It doesn't look like Bitcoin's going to change much. In at least in Marcus's opinion, if Bitcoin's going to continue to be the number 1, it's probably because it's so conservative and so set in what it is. It's very hard for regulators to attack it. Can't change it much, and this is what it is. And I think Marcus's kind of tour through the regulator halls and through the tech halls and through his time building Calibra and Libra itself kind of demonstrates the value that he now sees in Bitcoin. I think that leads to like a lot of implications for how founders should look at the tokens and the projects they're working on right now, and maybe take a note from what Bitcoin is doing. Because if he's noting it from a guy from Facebook who had to march into Congress and sit before the hot seat, then I think founders who are just building out tokens right now should really be paying attention to his comments. Jen, I'll throw it to you.
You know who these tweets reminded me of? I read them and I thought, these seem like these would have been tweeted by Jack Dorsey. And I read a story this morning of Jack speaking at MicroStrategy's Bitcoin conference, and he commented on Diem. He said that Diem was a wasted effort and time. Facebook should have focused its efforts on making Bitcoin more accessible for everyone. And so I thought about this kind of similarities between David Marcus's journey and Jack Dorsey's journey. And Zach, to your question, I wonder if the two of them will team up in the future. I wonder if we're going to see them go down that rabbit hole together.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. I think the timing of those two things is really, really remarkable. Is this David Marcus to Square now Block? Is this David Marcus? I don't know. We don't know what to expect here. He said in November he was going to pursue his more entrepreneurial roots. Maybe he's in the process of spinning up a venture, but I think there's a lot of swirling questions. The shout out in these tweets to Solana also potentially interesting. He said Bitcoin's the top dog, Ethereum's there, and then Solana is nipping at Ethereum's heels. So maybe some clues as to where he could head. But I like the Block pick. So, David Marcus to Block, I think is probably the odds-on favorite. Anyone have any thoughts here? Anyone predictions?
Interesting ideas.
Blind speculation. What do you think?
Blind speculation. Jack rejects David Marcus entirely because David dared to tweet about something other than Bitcoin. That's my prediction.
It's actually probably pretty good one.
That's a good one.
I like that one.
If I was Marcus, I'd just retire. He probably is early Bitcoiner. Hit the French Riviera, enjoy life. Don't get involved with Bitcoin Twitter anymore. Just peace out. That's what I would do.
Just live a nice life.
Live a nice life.